there was a lady, her name is Kate, and she wrote a book called Dances with Fire. And her story is fascinating. She talks in Dances with Fire about,
What?
oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. Yeah, she talks to it in Dances with Fire about she was a fireman or a fire person, I guess, who used to go put out forest fires up in the wilderness of Oregon and Washington and California and Florida and really crazy places. I love setting people up for success. I love them to feel like they walked away from my podcast and they won. They had a chance to pitch whatever it is that they want to not only their audience, but my audience. And when that happens, that's a victory for both. There's another guy, and another time that he actually, he's a Canadian, and he got a canoe, and he put wheels, a cart on it. And so he literally walked or paddled from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean all the way across Canada.
In today's episode of My Podcast Story, we have Jim Tracy, also known as the Grampion. Jim is the host of the podcast, The Grampion, where he shares his wealth of knowledge on workplace culture, resilience, and team building, drawing from his extensive experience as a successful CEO and entrepreneur. With a career that spans decades, Jim has founded, built, and sold multiple businesses, all while nurturing a family legacy as a proud grandfather to 18 grandkids. His unique blend of storytelling and real-life insights has earned him accolades, including induction into the Wireless Hall of Fame and recognition as a business icon of Idaho. Jim is here to share his inspiring journey on how he built his show from the ground up and how he's using his platform to foster positive change in the workplace and beyond. What's your name and the name of your podcast and what the podcast is about?
My name is Jim Tracy, and people call me the Grampion. My grandsons gave me that name, so it's kind of near and dear to me. But the podcast is just Grandpa Chats with Champions. I like to have conversations with people, and it's not necessarily that dopamine moment when you get handed a trophy or when you win a medal. It's about the grind and the challenge and what you've overcome to do something fantastic. And that's really more about the making of a champion than it is about, the actual championship award.
Wow. When did you start this podcast?
I started this podcast about a year ago, but that was not my first adventure in podcasting. We've done about 40 episodes now and have another 13 or so that are already booked. So we're pretty thrilled with the success of it right now.
Yeah. I'd like for us to step back a bit. What was your first attempt at podcasting?
Wow. My first attempt at podcasting was audio only. And what happened is I went down into our shop where our workers would get together before they went out in the field. And I was kind of dismayed to see that there were people down there that worked for me that I did not know. And I really wanted to be able to communicate with them. So we started doing, we called it legacy radio, but all the folks would get on a telephone or on their car radio through the telephone, and we would actually have a 15-minute weekly update. And they called it legacy radio. And we did it live, and so they were able to ask questions during it, and it was really a radio kind of format. But that was the first go at it, and one of the folks that actually did the studio setup for that, he told me, he said, "You can't do live." He said, "People are going to ask you questions that you don't want to answer." And I said, "Well, I think I can handle it." So one time somebody said, "Hey, Jim, how much money do you make?" And I said, "That's a great question. How much money do you make?" And they said, "Well, I don't want to tell you with everybody listening." And I'm like, "Me neither." So,
wow.
so we handled it. We handled the live part of it pretty well, and that evolved when we sold our business into another podcast that was, again, it was audio only, but that rolled into really an industry level podcast called On Radio, and we did 85, I think. So I'm somewhere north of 350 podcast type programs, and so that is a lot of fun. So pretty happy about that.
Wow. Wow. Okay. The podcast you're working on currently right now is the grandpa chess chats with champions, right?
Yes, Grandpa Chats with Champions. It's called the Grampion. My grandson Wesley, I was playing a card game with him and I won and Wesley's a very competitive individual and he said, "Well, you're not really my grandpa." I was like, "What? You can't tell me that." And he says, "Well, you're not a champion either." And then he got a wry smile on his face. He says, "You're a Grampian." And it
Oh,
stuck. And some of my other grandchildren called me that when they heard that. And so it's a very endearing term. But what it really has come down to is I do get an opportunity to talk with people from all different walks of life, and everybody's got a story, and they're so endearing and they're so wonderful. And I'm just grateful to be able to be the person on the other end of the microphone.
yeah. You've been doing this podcast for 1 year, right? And
Hmm.
I know you've made some hints regarding when you started the podcast and all that. But for me, I wanted to know like what was the cause and effect? What led to you starting the podcast? What inspired
Well,
this podcast?
yeah, I loved being able to get to talk to people on a broader scale without the pressure of like we would be doing projects and now I'm in a phase of life where I don't have projects to do, so I get to just get my message out. And so when we get to give a positive and a uplifting message to an audience, that's really the emphasis behind it. I get to talk about my book. I get to talk about the speaking gigs that I do. I get to basically just, communicate with people on a scale that is kind of unprecedented. And further, it really kind of was very valuable during COVID and not just communicating, but actually connecting with people.
Oh, wow. Okay. You mentioned that you did a live show, right? And for me, I'm kind of curious to know what led to the live show ending, or how did it end?
Well, the last show that we did, I sold the business that my son and I developed, and so when we got into to the tail end of COVID, my job had pretty much ended, and so as I retired from that business, I was no longer able to host it for them. So, but I didn't want it to end, so I just started doing my own.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that that show is still running.
I no, I don't think it is anymore. I think it's still up on the air and people can go listen to it and you can go listen to me and I'm not even there anymore. So, but no, there's no live version of it running anymore that I'm aware of.
Okay, okay, okay. So when you sold the business, you then decided to start. Well, I think it's wait. COVID was in 2020, and you started this
Uh-huh.
show a year ago, and that's like you started this show like
Mhm.
2024. So it's
Right.
they were like you. It was like there was this 2 year gap before you started your own show.
Yeah, no, there wasn't much of a gap. We ran on radio from 2019 through 20 late 2023, early 2024. And then at that point I was fulfilling all of my obligations to the former companies. That's when it kind of tailed off and I decided to start the Grampian.
Oh, okay, okay. Because when you said you sold the business in COVID, I was like, okay, the numbers are not adding up. So, wow,
Yeah,
wow,
well, we sold our business in initially in 2018, and then 18 months later, we had the opportunity to we actually partnered with another group of companies, and then we sold it again in 2019, and had a pretty successful run.
wow. Now, well, you just get to sit down and you chat with people and have interesting conversations with champions.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. Could you give us an idea of what a typical guest on your podcast, who they are, and give examples of some of the guests that have come on your
Well,
podcast?
sure. Sure. I've had I've had Navy SEALs and pastors. I've had people who are adventurers and athletes. I've had experts. Some of the business people that I've talked to are amazing. I've talked to quite a few authors and professional speakers who have, it's nice to have authors and speakers on your podcast because they've always got something to say and there's no dead air and they don't have to think very long about what they're going to talk about. But
Yeah.
there's been a number of, I've met during my tenure during the total podcast thing, I've met 6 Navy SEALs, which is very unusual. And there's actually 5, and there's one that's scheduled to come up. But I've also had some folks who have had wonderful podcasts. There's 2 pastors. One is the pastor of Calvary Chapel, and the other one is a pastor of and a great friend of mine, and he's out of a little church in South Dakota. The guy that one of my favorite podcasts is a guy by the name of Gary Irvin, and Gary at almost 70 years old or 67 years old or something like that, climbed all 7 of the tallest peaks in the world on all 7 continents. And then he's scheduled to come back on my podcast because he also just finished walking from the edge of the Antarctica. He walked to the South Pole, pulling all of his food and gear and tent behind him in his sled, and he walked all the way to the South Pole. Then he put my Grampion t-shirt on when he got there, and he kissed the South Pole with my Grampion t-shirt on. It was pretty funny.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
really, it's an inspiring, adventure.
A lot of these people, regardless of what they did, have inspiring stories. There's a fellow by the name of Bert Terhart, and I interviewed Bert, and he is the one of 7 people in the world ever to have sailed solo around the world. So he was alone in a sailboat, but he didn't use a GPS. He used a sextant and a compass. And yet he sailed all the way around the world navigating by the stars. And the sun. Isn't that amazing?
Wow. I mean,
And when he was,
that's where you're coming from.
yeah. And there's another guy, and another time that he actually, he's a Canadian, and he got a canoe, and he put wheels, a cart on it. And so he literally walked or paddled from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean all the way across Canada. It's just the stories that you come through are amazing. And then, that isn't even, those guys don't even consider themselves athletes. They're probably more in the adventurer category. But also, when I think of, walking to the South Pole, that's a pretty athletic endeavor. But there's another fellow who was on, his name is Cam Awesome, and he's a 12-time United States Olympic trial. He's qualifier. He was the Olympic team captain 4 times. And I had a couple of guys on who run marathons, and they're just a local guy here from Eagle, Idaho. His name is Steve Cutter, and he ran triathlons, and it's just the dedication that they put in there is absolutely stunning.
Wow. Like, wow, it's what the title of the podcast says. Grandpa chats with champions, and it reflects that.
Yeah.
Currently the podcast, is it audio only or video and audio?
It is video and audio both. Yeah.
So you're pretty active on YouTube.
Yeah, most of our followers are. We've got a lot of people on Apple Podcasts, a lot of people on Spotify, but I think the majority of our followers that are regulars are from YouTube.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So YouTube was like from day one of the podcast, or is it something that got added along the way?
Yeah. Yeah, and that is other than once I got kind of sideways with YouTube once. They I don't know what they kind of block your access, and so I went from 5,000 downloads down to 7 because they didn't like the message of my guest. It was too political, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. It happens. Well, for some
Yeah.
reason, they just. Yeah, I think that's the beauty of having a type of content that goes on to many multiple platforms, such that
Yeah.
irrespective of what happens, people can always listen to it if they want to.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. You know, there's some of the extraordinary people that I've also brought on are experts in their field. Like there's a fellow I talked to, and he's a jeweler, and he lived in California, but he is a he's an expert because he's a watchmaker, and he is a metallurgist, and he's a business owner, and just everything about this fellow by the name of Rich makes him special. I call him the arms jeweler because I actually went into his store, and he he foils robbers by having a pistol on his hip while he's wearing a jacket and tie. It's pretty funny. But also, there's another one that is coming up. It's right around the corner. I met a fellow. His name is Tim Dixon, and Tim will be reading my book into the Audible version. And to hear his stories about all the fascinating people that he has met over the years as an Audible narrator is amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Wow. Wow. You mentioned your book, and I know the episode is about um your podcast, but what's your book about? What's the name of your book and what's it about?
The name of the book is Building Men, and the subtitle is Character Lessons from Influencers. And it's really just, it's kind of like, it's kind of like a chapter by chapter podcast of my life. But it talks about the people who influenced me in very positive ways. And then I assign kind of a character a character trait to each chapter. And it has been a fascinating study. And I'm going to do some, I've got a lot of people asking me to come and do podcasts based upon the book, but I actually just love talking about the people in the book. And I've met, speaking of authors, I've met some fantastic authors. There was a lady, her name is Kate, and she wrote a book called Dances with Fire. And her story is fascinating. She talks in Dances with Fire about
What?
Oh, you still there?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. Yeah, she talks in Dances with Fire about she was a fireman or a fire person, I guess, who used to go put out forest fires up in the wilderness of Oregon and Washington and California and Florida and really crazy places. And another author I had a great podcast with, his name is Chad Foster, and he was the first person who was blind to do $1 billion Wall Street deal, and he was the first person who was blind to actually ski down a double black diamond snow skiing mountain. So I get to meet some fantastic people.
Well, uh, currently, is the podcast being monetized? Does the podcast make any money?
No, I use it to get my message out. I do have some small sponsors. We did our first sponsor commercial last week, but I haven't really done it for the monetary reasons. Although it's starting to get popular, and people are telling me that I have to pay attention to that. So I guess I better start looking, huh?
Yeah. No, like everybody likes to get a few extra bucks here and there.
There you go. I
Yeah,
don't know that
but
there's ever going to be a lot of money in podcasting for me unless I change my name to Joe Rogan, but I'm having fun.
uh, yeah, okay. Back to the reason you started your podcast. If we're looking back and those at those reasons, right? And the way the podcast is now, what it's currently doing, and everything. How would you say? Would you say what would like? Okay, I guess what I mean to ask is how well is the podcast satisfying that reason, the reasons for which you started the podcast in the first place?
I would say it is because I really want to be able to speak into people's lives with a positive message. So that was always number one. But I think that one of the things that has happened as you grow in your podcasting adventure, and this is for new and old podcasters alike, if you're a veteran or have done it a long time, I'm certain you'll agree with this. As you move through your podcasting journey, you really get better at it. And when I say that, you get better at asking questions, you get better at listening, you get better at allowing maybe a little silence to make the point of the guest, and you get an opportunity to ask questions that you know are going to be beneficial for the listener. And that really is a very gratifying thing.
Yeah. I mean, earlier on you mentioned that you started the podcast because you wanted to have conversation with, interesting and incredible um, people. And you're doing that and you're having fun and, you're basically, you basically have something that you love to do, which not everybody can say that.
Yeah, for sure. But not only that, it gets easier too. Because anything you do with repetition, obviously it gets easier. If you do it time and time and time again, you're going to get not only better at it, you get a little faster at it, you get a little bit more seasoned. But then, um, I think it was probably around 25 or so episodes where people started calling me and they said, "Hey, could I get on your podcast?" And when you get guests that are coming to you to have their message on your podcast and you feel that there's a symbiotic relationship that it can come and serve both purposes for their audience and for yours, then it becomes a wonderful thing, but it also makes your podcasting easier because you don't have to look for high quality guests. They're starting to come to you. And that's really
Yeah.
gratifying. Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, that's really it makes everything really easy because then you just selecting instead of reaching out to people or finding guests.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Um, and most
Yeah.
of the time, the people that listen to your podcast, they're usually like a very good fit for your for you to interview most of the time. Not all the time, but most of the
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, people don't wanna go on podcasts where they're gonna be uncomfortable. They don't wanna go on podcasts where this isn't a gotcha. I mean, I don't know that I mean, there's probably news programs that probably set people up for failure. I love setting people up for success. I love them to feel like they walked away from my podcast and they won. They had a chance to pitch whatever it is that they want to not only their audience but my audience. And when that happens, that's a victory for both. And when you get two people who actually get benefit from a joint effort, that's really what it's all about.
Currently, I want to know, are you the one that handle the production of your podcast, or is there someone helping you?
I do have someone helping me. It's Bohr Media. Ethan Borman has been a friend and an assistant and an employee, and he is just fantastic. He helps people with podcasts, both on the audio. He has a degree in he has literally a university degree in film, and so he's been very incredibly helpful in my podcast.
Hey, just a quick break. If you enjoying the insights so far and want even more behind the scenes ideas, inspiration, and tools for growing your own podcast, join my email list at mypodcaststory.com/join. That is mypodcaststory.com/join. You get access to helpful resources, exclusive updates, and the kind of stuff I only share with my email subscribers. Whether you're starting out or already podcasting, there's something valuable waiting for you. Head over to mypodcaststory.com/join and subscribe. Now, back to the episode. Wow. Wow. I mean, that's nice. So basically, what you do is you just sit and you chat, and that's it.
Yeah, but I also kick in 45 years of business experience. So so when I ask questions, sometimes it's because I already know the answer. I've gone through this crucible that they may be perhaps going through right now.
Yeah. Just to know, like, how many hours would you say it takes you to, talk to guests and chat with them, let's say in a week or in a month?
I would guess I spend, I'm doing, it's because of the book, I'm spending a lot of time doing other people's podcasts right now, as you're aware.
Yeah.
And so, but on my own podcast, I would say probably 3, maybe 4 max hours a week, depending upon how long the episode goes. We leave a wide window on our podcast. I don't want to bore my audience, so I don't want it to go too long without talking about much, but I don't want to cut my audience or my guest off either. And so one of the things that I've found is I used to be saying, hey, we're going to do a 30-minute podcast. And what I found is that people wanted more than that. And so I go until I start to lose a little interest, and then we wrap the show up. But it's been a fascinating study in actually the human experience, because if you look at people and understand what their message that they want to get out is, and then you look at your audience and say, will this message help them? If it will, then you just keep going, keep that podcast going.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting approach you have there, because a lot of persons they have a fixed number of minutes, hour, and I get it. There are a lot of logistics reasons behind that. But then you kind of like have the type of show like the Joe Rogan, where you basically just chat, and when you guys feel like it should come to an end, it comes to an end.
Correct. And then also sometimes what we used to do is we would go, well, if we're going to go long, let's go twice long, and we'll put it into 2. We'll make 2 episodes. And so they went back to back episodes. And what I found is that that people lost interest after the first episode, and so they didn't maybe turn in as much or listen in as much on the second episode. So I just found out it was very productive to keep it going. And what happened is the amount of time that people actually listened to the podcast was extended significantly when the podcast length went up.
Wow. So just to know, like what's like the average of the episodes released, or what was the length of like the last 2 to 3 episodes released on the podcast?
If I look at that, I would say that I'm gonna go up there and say so. There was one that was just released that was I don't even think it was 30 minutes long. So the last couple were probably closer to a half an hour. One was maybe 40 minutes. The one before that was 43 minutes. The one before that was an hour and 3 minutes. I've got several out of the past 8 that went well over an hour.
Well,
And I don't have any that are under. I have one that went under a half an hour, and that was 29 minutes. So I think they're getting more interesting, though.
yeah, yeah. Um, the so far you've been podcasting now for 1 year. Have you had gotten a message from your listeners?
Yes, the listeners, and because it's segmented into like I get a lot of direct messages from pilots because I'm a pilot, and so if a pilot comes on my program and they say even one little thing wrong, boy, the pilots are the pilots get pretty corrective in their responses, so they don't want any bad information to come out. I also when we I just did one with Pastor David Axe, and we talked about Easter, and there were some people who, they take offense at anything religious on a podcast. And I just look at that. It's such a big part of life, and not only life in general, but it's such a big part of my life that I can't not talk about it. And we did a podcast with the chief executive officer of AMAC, which is a conservative organization out of Washington D.C. that fights for seniors, and that's the one where the folks over at YouTube didn't like the politics very much, so they turned it off. But I got incredibly positive feedback from that. We have not very many views of it on the video part of it, but the people sent me emails and said, "Hey, you should have her on more often." So I'm really thinking, "Hey, we got to figure out a way to get her back on the program."
Yeah.
And that's
So
all based upon the feedback that I got from our listeners. I really try and listen to the listeners.
yeah. Now that you've been doing this podcast, um, of all the messages you've gotten so far, which one would you say is really, really thoughtful, encouraging, and kind of like stands out that you just can't forget?
Wow. There was a fellow, and I'm trying to remember exactly which one it was. I remember, it's funny, I remember the things that he says, but not necessarily his name. So I'm bringing that up right now. I'm not gonna put his name on the air, but I'm gonna bring up what he said because it was so wonderful to be able to
Yeah,
read the
for
feedback.
the sake of the podcast, let's just call this person. Is it a guy or a lady?
Is a guy,
Or let's just call this
and he
person
is a
John.
yeah. So John wrote me, and he said that we didn't really quite think alike, but then he said that we share a lot in purpose and vision. And he just recognized me as a successful creator and a fantastic influencer. And I
Oh,
read that and I thought, wow, isn't that what we're supposed to be? We're supposed to be successful at creating something that someone wants to listen to, and we want to have a positive influence in the lives of those who choose to they're choosing to spend their time with us. And so when I get those kind of responses, those are very meaningful to me.
yeah. How often do you release an episode?
I am now on a pace of releasing an episode every Tuesday.
Okay, okay, okay. Every Tuesday, every week. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, we earlier on we talked about monetization, and you said that yeah, while it's nice to get to earn an extra bucks for the podcast wasn't really
Yeah.
started for that. It was started because you wanted to chat with amazing people, and yeah,
One of the things that has come to pass is that people are now coming to me and say, "Hey, I'd like you to sponsor us." And these are not big dollar sponsors, but we did our first advertisement last week where we actually did a video advertisement on the podcast for a product called Canine Meats, and I'm so thrilled that they were able to experience some good feedback already from that. And then also we did a complimentary one for a outfit that I really believe in called Grandparents Academy, and Grandparents Academy is just helpful to grandparents who want to be better grandparents, and that's always a great mission to climb onto.
yeah, yeah. And that's one of the sweet thing about having a niche podcast is when you have a sponsor, the purpose, the goal, and everything aligns perfectly with the kind of people that listen to your podcast.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. That's why I said when we got on the air at first, I said, "Here, this is going to be kind of fun. We got two podcasters on a podcast talking about podcasting."
yeah, 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 yeah. That's the thing because with having a niche podcast, you like the depth of value you can give is just different compared to like a top level show.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we also have an aspiration to make sure that we're producing the best possible podcast that we can. And when we get that kind of quality out, you're going to get an opportunity. You'll get some feedback from your peers, and it'll make you better.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. And so far you've been podcasting. You've been doing this for close to 6 to 7 years now. I don't know if based on what you told me so far. Um,
Mhm.
even though the main podcast you're doing now is like is over like a year now. The question I want to ask now is in the list of your top three most embarrassing moments regarding your podcast. Do you have that? Do you have that list?
Because of my age, I'm going to be 66 years old, and
Wow.
because of my age, I struggle a bit with technology. Um, but I've had earbuds pop out. I've had microphone stands fall over. I had one where we recorded the entire podcast, and the audio on the person on the other end was so bad we couldn't even use it. So
Yeah,
had to call him back and say maybe we'll re-record sometime.
yeah, yeah,
But I think one of the most embarrassing things is when the microphone stand fell over. But having a good editor helps because no one ever saw that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, the funny thing you say is that's what you just described is not peculiar to you. Like most of the guests I've had on the show, like that's the same thing they struggle with. Some of them they've had to like record an episode only for them to realize that the episode was not recording at the end of the day.
Yeah. Forgot to push record or something, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it's really,
Yeah.
really it's really painful because then especially when you had an amazing chat, you're like, oh, even if you record another
Yeah.
one, it just can't be like the first one.
Oh, it's so fun when you get a good one,
Yeah,
especially when people call you or send you an email and they said, I really loved it when, and they remember specific things that I don't even remember. And it's just wonderful. Just wonderful. It's a great thing that we do. As long as we're being positive with people, I think it's very helpful for everybody.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean that's like the main thing. Where do you
Yeah, it is for me.
yeah where do you have any plans for your podcast that you'd love to share with us?
I've got some guests coming up that I'm so excited about. I've got some folks that are going to be on my podcast that have agreed. One is Paul Allen. He's the voice of the Minnesota Vikings. I've got a CEO of a major convenience store that's going to come on. I have another Navy SEAL who's a nationally known name. And I also have a lot of interview requests coming in that I think that if you get, one of the things that's wonderful about podcasting is the people you meet. But if you get someone on a podcast and you get along pretty well, then the chances are pretty good that you're going to go on their podcast as well. And that is
Yeah.
very gratifying when you can get along with people and just enjoy your time together. And then hopefully both audiences get to some significant benefit from it as well.
Uh, I one of the things I've noticed about podcast is uh, you've been doing this now for quite some time. So I was saying that one of the things I've noticed which common amongst most of the guests on podcasts is that many of them the podcast is not what the mainstream media would consider a traditional kind of success. For them, it's is what they define success to be. That's what the podcast is doing for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that if you look at our ability um, as an industry to get out unvarnished truth. What most people don't realize is that it feels like we're just sitting down and having a cup of coffee together. And it's kind of really what's happening. We just have a piece of technology between us, but we're just having a conversation. You and I just met. We don't know a lot about each other, but we're having an enjoyable
Yeah,
conversation that's packed with things that you want to know and things that I want to say and things that I want to know and things that you want to say, and the net benefit is not simply to the audience, it's to us because it's really unvarnished
yeah,
truth. And when we get that kind of truth out in the marketplace and we do it in a kind way, I think it's really important that podcasters don't go the way of talk radio.
yeah,
But I mean, I'm sure there's some podcasts that are going to be, a little bit inflamed and heated and things like that. But I don't know that that's even necessary. I think we have the gift of letting the people
yeah,
decide.
yeah. Um, yeah, that's so true. Um, in a way to like follow up on the same question I've asked, that is, since you've started your podcast, what are the other benefits? Right? No, this has nothing to do with okay, the podcast has lost download. Podcast is doing this, is doing that. I mean, like, oh, I started a podcast, and this is the improvement I can point out to say this is what I've gained from starting the podcast personally.
Yeah, I think that number one, I've gained knowledge. I think that when you talk to people, and especially when you get experts on, and they tell you things you didn't know, it's hard to ignore it when they're coming on as your guest and you're fully in. When you're doing a podcast, you're so fully engaged with them. So when they tell a story, especially you hear out not only what they say but what they mean. You gather so much knowledge that I think that is an amazing benefit. But also, if you look at the kind of people who come on the podcast, um, you get to take that information and spread it. And so, and by spread it, I mean when I go on a podcast, I want my listeners, I want my audience to go listen to that podcast, just like I want the listeners of that podcast to come and listen to mine. I want the people who are listening to my podcast story. I want you to go to the Grampion and I want you to listen to my podcast as well, so that we can all learn together. And when we do that, it's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Like I mean, to get kind of like this audience to move to this other audience, it's really nice. Yeah, because
Yeah.
people.
And when that audience migrates, hey, I might sell another book, or you might get another sponsor, or, some podcaster's going to learn something from both of us. And pretty soon they're going to be experts and they're going to teach their kids how to do it. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Like, I mean, yeah, that's if we can do that, that's a nice achievement.
Yeah. We'll make the world a better
Yeah,
place.
yeah, yeah. Um, I've asked you about money, and yeah, because for me, the whole idea regarding this podcast is just to to actually speak to people that are doing this stuff. Because podcast is one of those things that is not as glamorous or as flashy as the other forms of content. Like when it comes to the download numbers, all those things, you don't even get to know what it is, except the host tells you, "Oh, this is the number I get from my downloads and all that." And for that reason, a lot of persons they don't even know what it looks like, it feels like to be an actual podcaster in the real world, because all they've seen is Joe Rogan
Yeah.
and the big guys and all those ones. So that's what they think podcasting looks like, not knowing that it's a different game entirely.
Yeah. Everybody likes eating sausage. Nobody likes
Oh,
making it.
yeah. Um, if if you if someone who's just like starting out a podcast, probably okay. Let's say maybe they're older and they're like, okay, well, it's technology, it's probably not for me and stuff like that. What would you what would you say to them? What advice would you know cannot what would you they are listening. So what do you have for them? Yeah, what do
Yeah.
you want to tell them?
Number one, go
Okay.
for it. Don't be shy. Go for it. Don't think that because if you're a little older or you're a little younger, I mean, you still have a message that's important. You still have some life experiences that you can share with people. You still have a voice. So, number one, don't be shy about it. Go for it. And the second part of it is be consistent. I found myself after I started, it was like, oh man, I gotta go do a podcast. And it felt a little bit like I have to go do this thing and I don't know if I have the right guest, and just do it. Just be consistent. If you have to have your wife come on, have your wife come on. If you get a Navy SEAL, celebrate. If you want your pastor to come on and share his message, don't be shy. Just be consistent. If you're going to do it every week, then schedule a time, set it aside, and be disciplined and faithful. And then if you want to take a vacation, do a best of podcast. You can always do that.
Yeah. Compile previous episodes and just put it out there. Yeah.
Yeah. But don't stop. Be
Yeah,
consistent.
yeah. I mean, the first it's more like the prerequisite of podcasting. Before you even say or talk about any other thing, you have to ask. The first question is, are you consistent? Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
because you have to show up before you expect miracles to happen.
If your audience knows you'll be back, they'll join you there. If they don't know if you'll be back, they might not show up. And if that audience quits showing up, you don't have a podcast
Yeah, I mean,
anymore.
it's like the real world. I've had so many times where you let's say it's a convenience store that you every time you're passing through that place, it's not open. And so the day you decide to say, okay, I want to buy something, you're like, no, there's no need of going there because what are the chances they open? The last 5 times I passed there, they were not open, so they won't be open. So let me just go buy from
Yeah.
this other person here. So the same thing with podcasting. If you're not showing up consistently, people are going to like say they're not going to like show up. They're not going to like in order for people to show up for you, you have to show up for them first. And I feel that that's the logic
Mm,
behind.
yeah. And if people expect you to be there and you don't show up, you probably are not going to get them to tune back in.
Yeah. I mean, they had expectations and you disappointed them, so it's kind of hard to trust you. Yeah,
For sure.
yeah.
For
Thank
sure.
you so much for sharing your story. Like, I mean, it's really inspiring. Every time I talk to a new guest, or I keep seeing the different things I could possibly do with a podcast, and that for me, it's
Yeah.
it's enlightening, honestly.
Awesome. Well, I am honored to be here and I so appreciate you asking to be on your podcast. If anybody needs more information, they can go to the Grampion, TheGrampion, thegrampion.com.
Yeah. The funny thing is that the next question I was going to ask you, where can people learn more about you and what you do? Yeah. Okay. So,
There you go. I preempted it with the
okay.
Grampian. Wisdom,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me on. I am so grateful for you and the message and the hope you're giving to podcasters everywhere.
Yeah. And then if you want to listen to the podcast, I'd love for you to say it so that they hear your voice. Your
Okay.
podcast.
My voice is not my favorite voice.
The name of your podcast. I'd love for you to like mention it again so that those that are thinking of listening to it can go check it out. Yeah.
Okay. The best place to go probably go check it out is on YouTube and or Apple Podcast and just look for the Grampion, Grampion, the Grampion or thegrampion.com, wherever you get your
Wow.
podcast.
The name of the podcast is the Grampion. I thought you said the name of the podcast was Grandpa Chats with Champion.
That's a subtitle. It's actually the
Oh,
Grampion, and the subtitle is Grandpa Chats with
okay.
Champions. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that clarification. So that I know what to write in the show
No
notes.
worries.
That's it for today's episode of my podcast story. I am Wisdom Okonkwo, and I hope this conversation sparked new ideas and gave you a deeper look into the heart of podcasting. If you've loved this episode, consider supporting the show by buying me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/wisdomhq. Every bit helps keep the stories going. And hey, don't forget to follow, rate, and share this podcast with another podcaster or creator who would find it helpful. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.